This is Ask Joe 177.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. My name's Joe Gilder. This is Ask Joe, Home Studio Corner podcast, brought to you by me, Joe Gilder, from my studio, which, if you're watching the video version, we're a little messy today. Been doing a lot of recording this week, like production type work where I'm doing electric guitar, acoustic guitar, and piano or keyboard stuff. And it's just nice to have it all around me. I like to have the world centered around me when I'm doing this work, because I can throw the electric over there on the stand, turn around and play some keys, adjust levels here, push record and stop here. My pedal board's down here for electric, my amp's in the other room, my acoustics are over here, there's a mic here for acoustic, all that kind of stuff. So, hence the tribute to Clapton intro for this week's podcast. So how are you? I hope you're doing well. Hope you're making some music. Hope you're making some time for music. If you haven't been hanging out with me on Facebook and YouTube specifically, I would love for you to come hang out there. Facebook.com/Joe Gilder Music. And then on YouTube, it's just youtube.com/Home Studio Corner. I've been doing a lot. If you haven't been paying attention, just in the last week, I have been putting out daily videos, sometimes multiple videos a day, where I'm in the studio doing work or I'm out doing something else, but anything related to music, talking about it and showing you what I'm doing and some behind the scenes stuff and just talking about life and failure and the real ins and outs of, just yesterday I streamed a acoustic guitar session and somebody commented and said, it's really great to see these and see that it's just, there's no real quote magic to it. It just takes work and effort and time. So if you haven't been checking those out, if you're just listening to the podcast on your phone, or maybe you just check out these podcasts when they come out, go check out what else is going on over there. I post the videos both to YouTube and Facebook. Been doing a little bit of Facebook Live. So just I'm trying to let you in more because I think there's so much, I can be so much more helpful to you by actually letting you into some of these sessions and things that I'm doing versus only doing a video where I say, today I'm going to teach you how to EQ a kick drum. Those are great, and I have plenty of those as well, but I really feel like more rubber meets the road content is what you can expect from me. Also, you can expect to see a little bit more from me specifically on the music front, as I like to document here on the podcast. I've got the band, and I finally booked my first show. So if you're watching this live and you can get to Nashville next Monday, August 29th, 2016, at 9 p.m., me and the boys and Frankie, the girl, are going to play a show, I think about a 45-minute set. So we'll play all my music and one song from Frankie's. It's going to be great. It's going to be fun. It's at this little dive bar called Springwater here in Nashville. So very excited. It is the first of hopefully many shows, and it was a big step. Hopefully we get a lot of people there. It's going to be fun. Okie dokie. So what I want to talk about today is shift gears just a little bit and talk about room treatment and room correction. That's kind of what I want to rant about. And I've got some people have asked some good questions over on Facebook and here in the chat. And so I want to dive into that a little bit more and share my opinions on it and my thoughts on real world application. Does any of that stuff matter at all? Is it a hoax? Or can it be a cop-out that you are not working on music because you're waiting to treat your room? So we're going to talk about that a little bit today. So think about the last time you saw a video of one of the big mix engineers. So it could be a promo video for a plugin company. It could be, usually, it seems like mostly, except for like Pensado, they're mostly videos done by Universal Audio or Focusrite or Waves and things like that. And they show them in their studio, occasionally on documentaries and things like that. But even stop watching this and go look one up. Just go look up Chris Lord Algae, Dave Pensado, insert big mixer name here. And what's interesting is you'll see them, if it's just a headshot or a picture of them working in their studio, what do you notice? For the most part, and this is probably an overgeneralization, but you notice that they're in a room that is jam-packed full of gear. So they've got usually a big console in front of them. They've got couple producers' desks behind them with just racks and racks of gear. Just hit that mic stand. And then they've got, gear over here, big, huge, tall racks of gear all along the walls. And what you don't notice most of the time, and again, not all the time, but enough to where I've noticed it and really been intrigued by it over the last few years, is you don't see a lot of foam on the walls. You don't even see a lot of diffusers, a lot of absorption panels, a lot of bass traps. Granted, some of these rooms could be built into the design of the room, but for the most part, you're seeing a room jammed full of stuff, and that's their mixing environment. Specifically, I think about some of the videos Chris Lord-Alge has done where I see him mixing, and I don't see, there may be some cool stuff above his head on the ceiling that I don't see, but everything else is used to hold a piece of equipment. So directly to the left and right of the mix position, he's got stuff. Now granted, he's got a pretty big room, but he's got stuff there. And to me, that is really intriguing. You go to all these spaces and you see they just don't have what we probably consider in the online audio world to be a proper space. But what are they doing out of that space? They're doing really, really good work. So this all kind of came about. So as you know, about a year ago, we moved into a new place, a new house, and my studio space, which is cool. It's 2 rooms. I use one as kind of a tracking room, and this that you're seeing me in is the control room, but it's laid out awkwardly. This is really the only place for me to put my desk. The technical best place to put your desk is, if you have a rectangular room, put your desk against one of the shorter walls so that your speakers are firing down the longer length of the room. And then put the common sense is to put treatment to the left and right of the mix position, and behind it and maybe above it, and any of those first reflection points, you put up some absorption, some foam, some fiberglass panels, something to absorb those reflections so you're hearing mostly direct sound from the speakers and not a lot of room sound when you are mixing. And then the same thing for recording. If you go into a room that is all drywall and there's no absorption anywhere, it's hardwood floors and drywall, really anything you record in that room most likely is going to have that room sound in it. So I'm going to come down. It's probably going to sound like I'm contradicting myself, but I'm going to say that room treatment is important, but at the same time, it's not that important. Okay? So here's what I mean. You go back to the Chris Lord-Alge example. His room isn't obviously treated. He has mostly a bunch of stuff. There are plenty of things, quote, wrong about his room. There are reflections all over the place. There's a massive console in front of him that's bouncing sound around. There are pieces of gear right behind him that are bouncing sound back at his ears. There's gear along each wall, and sound is bouncing back at his ears. It's not, quote, unquote, ideal. But guess what? He's one of the top mixers in the world. So what does that tell you? Does it tell you that acoustic treatment and room correction and stuff like that is bogus? No, but it should tell you that comes in the far second place to the quality of the person sitting there and the talent level that they have and the ability to hear a song and to process that song in a way that creates an amazing mix. A good mixer is going to make a good mix even in a crappy sounding room most of the time. So while acoustic treatment is important, and I'll talk about that in a second, I think we tend to, especially in home studios, we tend to almost use it as an excuse, at least some people. Well, here's why my mixes sound bad. I've got a bad sounding room. And I've never found that to be the case. Anytime I've made a bad mix, do you want to know why I created a bad mix? Because I made a bad mix, because I was a bad mix engineer that particular day. I did not do a good job of mixing that song. Now, does a bad room contribute to that? Sure. But it's not the whipping boy. It's not the scapegoat for the reason I'm bad at mixing songs. So that may seem harsh, or maybe it seems like common sense to you, but that's reality. Yes, you don't want a room that's completely bare. If you remember years ago, and I'll try to put this in the show notes, I did a review of the RLX Ruminator kit. Which is their kind of big box of foam. They send you some bass traps, they send you some foam panels and some adhesive, and you can put them up in your room. And if you go to homestudiocorner.com, scroll to the bottom and search for Ruminator, you will find my review with some audio examples. So I was moving rooms, and so I recorded the examples of the audio before I put the treatment up, So I sang a vocal in the room, and then I put the treatment up and I sang the exact vocal again. Now, obviously, it's two different performances, but the overall sound was way different. And I've shared this before, but several people listened to the before and after, and they realized the before sound wasn't awful, but when they heard the after sound, they realized, oh, right, there was a lot more room in that sound than I realized. So go look that up if you haven't heard it yet, because it's a really kind of revealing. There's an untreated recording and a treated recording. And again, it's just some foam on the wall, some bass traps in the corners. It's nothing amazing, but it does kill down on a lot of those just room reflections. It sounds less like a dude singing in a room full of drywall and more like a dude singing in a properly treated space, if that makes sense. So while, especially on the recording end, if you've got a blank, bare room and you snap your fingers and it just echoes like crazy, your recordings are going to echo. But you can do things like put up some cheap treatment or just put furniture in the room, put a carpet down, maybe build some gobos. You can do things to cut down on the reverberant nature of the room, and I think that's important. It doesn't need to be dead. It doesn't need to be soundproof, but it does need to not have such a huge mass of sounds bouncing around that everything you record is echoey. Unless, of course, you want everything you record to sound echoey, which you probably don't. On the flip side, though, there is no amount of treatment you can do to a room that will fix all of its problems. If your room and the dimensions of your room are set up in such a way that 150 hertz is a problem frequency, maybe there's a big boost in your room or a big cut in your room at that frequency, you can do things like bass traps and bigger, thicker material to help with some of the lower frequencies. They're not going to fix the problem. They might help it a little bit. They might improve it a little bit. But at the end of the day, your room is lying to you, right? Your room is going to give you an EQ curve on everything you hear. And so your job is to learn, what does a good mix sound like in my room? Not how I want it to sound, but what does a good mix sound like in my room that will then move off into other rooms. So if I get it to sound like this in my room, I know that it will sound good in all the other rooms I go into. That is the bane of every home studio owner's existence, especially in the beginning, because you just don't have the chops or the experience to have your mixes translate. I did a mix last week for a client, and he had a couple of quick level changes he wanted me to do revision-wise, but ultimately he said, I'm amazed. I listened to this on my earbuds and in my car and on different speakers, and it translates on all of them really well. That's amazing. But what I loved is he didn't say, hey man, how'd you do that? He said, it's just amazing that you were able to do that. Now, I'm not saying that to brag about myself. It's just that I've put in the hours and 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 years of work to where these speakers, for example, I know these speakers. I've had them in 4 different studios, 5 different rooms, 6 different rooms, and I know what these sound like. These EX66, what are they? The EX66s from M Audio. They don't make them anymore, I don't think. I've had them for 8, 9, 10 years, and I hope they don't die because I just know what they sound like. I know what to expect, and I can get good mixes out of them. So this room, it's treated somewhat. You can see behind me, I've got some absorption on the wall behind me. I've got a little absorption on this wall, and then I've got a gobo here, but it's just here for recording. So this room is fairly live sounding. It's not a great sounding room. It's probably not a proper sounding room, but I'm able to get good mixes because I know what I'm listening for, and I just have learned how to get good mixes in this room. That is the key. That's the quote-unquote secret. So if you want to use room correction software, we'll talk about that in a minute. If you want to treat your room, absolutely do that. But what I want you to do is not to look at it to be a silver bullet that will solve all your problems. Just like anything in real life, you buy this one Wi-Fi router hoping that it'll solve all your slow internet problems, and maybe it helps a little bit, but it doesn't really solve them. Or you put that fuel stuff in your gas tank of your car thinking it'll make that weird noise and your engine go away. It might be good for your car and it might help it run a little better, but it's probably not going to deal with that bigger problem. Though that's what I'm trying to get at is I don't think people like RLX and all the other acoustic treatment companies are selling bad stuff. I think it's fantastic and it has its use, and I think it is certainly important, but probably not nearly as important as I maybe used to say it was. It used to be, if you went into a forum like Gear Sluts or Recording Review or Harmony Central, those forums, and I used to hang out there. I don't so much anymore. Somebody would say, hey, what's the best vocal mic? Or what's the best mic for electric guitar? Or how do they get that vocal sound on this album? And the answer to almost every question was acoustic treatment. People would just jump in and say, doesn't matter, bro, until your room is perfectly treated and you've got a good sounding room. And it was almost to the point of, really? I mean, how many stories? At this point, we've heard hundreds of stories of people recording whole albums in houses. You know, when the levee breaks, the drums, right? They had the drums set up in a hallway just temporarily until they moved them into the recording room, but it sounded good, right? James Taylor, what's the album they recorded at a house in Martha's Vineyard? There weren't proper treated rooms. They just set things up in a place that sounded good and made a record that won a Grammy. There are a bajillion. Graham Cochran was just telling me about a guy who recorded a full song in his car. He would go out on his lunch break with a USB mic and would record like kick drum in the backseat of the car and then snare and hi-hat. So I think he's going to feature him on his website, so look out for that. It's not as important as you think it is, okay? There are so many stories of people making hit records and stuff using really cheap equipment. It's important. Equipment is important just like anything, but it's not the most important thing. You are the most important thing. The person playing the music, the person running the session, the person whose mind is thinking about the songs and then turning them into something beautiful, that's what matters. And I know you probably feel like I beat this horse to death, but I feel like acoustic treatment is one of those things probably I've been wrong about in the past. And I want to say I'm going to kind of change my opinion on this, and I'm going to say, you know what? It's important, but it's also not. So don't get too hung up on the small details of your room. Better yet, just figure out how to make great sounding music and recordings in the room you have right now. Boom. All right, so I'm going to answer your questions, mostly questions about acoustic treatment because, like I said, it's both important and not important. But if you have other questions, especially those of you live on the chat, feel free to ask them here, and I will do my best to answer as many as I can before I run out of time. Okay, Peter Kish is one of my VIP members, and he asks over on Facebook, he says, what's your take on automatic room correction software like IK Multimedia's ARC System 2? That's a great question. So if you're not familiar with ARC, KRK has something called the Ergo, which is a hardware box, but there's there are several solutions out there that allow you to set up a microphone. It will listen to your room and listen to your speakers in the mix position and oftentimes in multiple locations in your room. It'll measure all this stuff, and then it'll create essentially a custom EQ curve for your specific room and your specific speakers. And the idea of it is great. I've heard mixed opinions. You know, my acoustic expert friends say they've done measurements with that, and they found that there was one in particular told me he tested one of the earlier versions of that system, and the only difference before and after using that plugin was things were slightly louder across the entire frequency spectrum, which I thought was interesting. But to me, that almost makes a little more sense than trying to fix all the problems with acoustic treatment, because acoustic treatment, like I said before, it will help, but it won't solve especially a lot of the bigger low-frequency problems that you have in your room. I personally don't really do the room correction thing. I had it years ago. I tried it. It was just kind of okay. I would rather have just a decent amount of absorption in the room, get the room sounding to what I think sounds good, and then mixing from there and just working and getting good in that room. To me, I don't feel like if I'm missing anything in my room because I don't have that room correction, I don't think it's affecting my mixes. And if it is, it's minimal. And I don't think if I got it and set it up today, my mixes would instantly improve by 50%. I just don't think that's the case. Now, I said something important before just then where I said, get the room sounding good to me. What that means to me, it makes me think back when I first tried the ARC from IK Multimedia. I was working at Sweetwater years ago, living in an apartment, had these tiny little, remember the Event ALP5 speakers? They were super cool. They had like a white cone. I had a pair of those. And we had a 2-bedroom apartment, and 1 bedroom was my studio. And I literally had no treatment at all. So it was 4 drywall walls and carpet. And I had speakers set up. And because I was broke, I had no money. So I eventually bought like a box, $100 box of RLX foam, and put it up around the mix position. And it really did help because it tamed down, there was just sound slapping everywhere. you play a song and it's like the room just totally shakes up. And Corey Chambers, yes, I am shamelessly promoting Starbucks. I'm not afraid to shamelessly promote. Anyway, so in a bare room, I couldn't hear the speakers that well. You listen and you think, I'm hearing more of the room than I am the speakers. That to me is a problem. So yes, that's a situation where acoustic treatment or just something thick, whether it's a bed, a mattress, or whatever, can make sense to tame down just those slappy reflections and that echoey sound. So to me, that's a part of it. So when I first moved into this room, I didn't have any of these. I had maybe one or two panels up, and it was just very, very lively. It's still a fairly live-sounding room, but now I've put up a bunch of absorption, especially along this back wall, that absorb a lot of that. And so now it sounds like a balanced room. It doesn't. When I walk in, between having the rug on the floor and the treatment that I have around, it sounds natural to me. It sounds like a normal room. It doesn't sound overly hyped and reverberant. That's what I'm talking about. If you use acoustic treatment to get there, great. But I just like to get it to that point and then focus on learning how to mix on these speakers in this room. You know, just like if I'm playing a show and I have to use somebody else's amp and guitar, it doesn't happen very often, but if I did, I would just figure out how to make that amp and guitar sound like I wanted it to sound. It's kind of the same thing. I want to make this room produce mixes that sound good to me on all systems. So it's really just putting my head down and doing the hard work of actually doing that. All right, here's another question from Camillo Atkinson over on Facebook. Says, this is how my room looks. So it posted a picture. Looks like a pretty basic rectangular room with the mix position up against some curtains, some gold curtains, and then there's a couple of pieces of 2 foot by 2 foot RLX foam on the wall to one side of the mix position that I can see. So he says, I have 2 fiberglass panels behind the monitors, so that's what's behind those curtains. And then I've got some treatment on the wall to get first reflection points, and then bass traps are in the corners. My question is, I don't hear any difference with or without the bass traps. Should I add more? Leave them the way they are now or remove them? Sorry for the long post, and thank you. So, interesting about bass traps. I understand the concept, and I've noticed in some rooms when I've put up a bass trap, the actual room sounds like there's more bass. It does something to the room to even out the low frequencies to where it feels like I can hear the bass better. It doesn't make there have less bass. It actually made it sound like there was more. I don't know if that's the case all the time. In my last studio, you might remember, if you look behind me, you see on top of this white shelf back over my shoulder, those are 2 about 8 or 9 foot long by 3 foot panels that were used as bass traps in my last studio. They were in the corners behind my mix position in the corners left and right, and those were my quote-unquote bass traps. And I got them, the guy that built my gobo and all these other panels, I had him build those to the exact height of the room so that I could use them as bass traps. Did I hear a huge difference? No. And then I don't know. I can't speak to that. But then I get to this studio, and there's no free corners. There are cabinets in every corner. There's that weird shelf in that corner. There's a door in that corner. There's like a sink in that corner. So I have no corner to put bass traps, and then the ceiling is sloped, so I can't even put it along the ceiling. You could maybe do it along the floor, but they say that doesn't help that much. So what did I do? I just laid them on that shelf, and now I've got these 2 massive, thick absorbers that are absorbing a lot of frequencies. So when I go and record over there, which I did actually at the beginning of this podcast, if you saw that, or this week when I've been recording acoustic guitar, I bring one gobo, which is a rolling panel. You can see it kind of off to the side, I think. I bring it up, and it's kind of in front of me, and then to the side of me, I've got all these panels, so it's a nice, tight-sounding space to record. So I would say, to answer your question, Camillo, I don't think my answer would be, how do your mixes sound? Are you happy with your mixes? And if the answer is no, if the answer is yes, then just leave it alone. Keep making music. That's always the answer. If the answer is no, then I'm going to say probably just keep working on your mixing. I really think you've got plenty in place that you should be able to get good mixes out of your setup. And that's going to be the case for most people. If you showed me a picture and it was 2 speakers in a room, a laptop, and all drywall walls, then I would say, yeah, you're probably going to have a hard time because that's just so bouncy of a room. But otherwise, with just a reasonable amount of treatment, you should, in my opinion, be able to get good mixes. The variable is going to be you. How much mixing have you done? How good are you at mixing? How many mixes have you done in your life? If you've done 1, then you shouldn't expect to have good mixes. You just shouldn't. You occasionally, happen across a really good mix just because every once in a while something happens great. But to be consistently cranking out good mixes, you just have to have put in a lot of time and work into it. And I know that's a pretty cliche answer, but it's kind of the truth. All right, a couple questions over in the chat. Here's one from Buddy Jesus Smokes. It says, thinking of getting some RLX for making an enclosure around my computer. It has a hum that is perceived by my microphones at 14 kilohertz. What do you think? Are you hearing that in your mixes? Like when you finish a project, do you hear a bunch of 14K? If so, could you just turn it down? Could you just notch out that frequency in whatever tracks are hearing it? To me, something that high in 14K, if it's coming through my mixes, then yes, I might try to do something about it. But when anyone asks about some kind of more subtle stuff like this, I'd usually ask, all right, really can you really hear it in your mixes? If the answer is, well, no, but when I solo the track, I hear it and it's really awful. I don't care what it sounds like soloed, and neither does anyone else in the world, unless you're releasing your solo acoustic guitar track by itself, or if you're doing a really, really, really stripped down session where it's just one guitar or one guitar and one mic. In those instances, it can be a little more sensitive and you may not want as much noise. Even then, if you're more focused on capturing a great performance and getting a great recording, even if there's noise, it'll be fine. Some of my favorite albums, I hear noise, I hear mistakes, I hear things like that, and I don't care because the music and the performance are what I'm listening to. You know what I mean? Yep. Caleb says, kind of off the topic, but I'd like to hit a couple of non-acoustic related questions. Says, would you spend more on a microphone or on a preamp? I tend to come down on the side of probably preamp, because your preamp then makes all your microphones better, in a sense, right? If you've got a nice preamp, then your SM57 suddenly takes on a new life of its own because you can get some more tones out of it because you've got a preamp that adds a different flavor. But I'm not really sold one way or the other. To be completely honest with you, I don't love using the stock preamps on the studio live if I can on main tracks like acoustic guitars and really all guitars and vocals and bass. I like to go through some of my PreSonus preamps, but honestly, the Eureka, which sold for $500 new, and the ADL 700, which sells for over $2,000, they're both good. And I would take either one of them. It's not like one is so much better, if that makes sense. So something that's a little bit better than your stock preamps on your interface is probably a good idea. Something that costs a couple of $1,000s, probably not necessary. Now, if you think I'm being disingenuous, I did a deal with PreSonus where I did a bunch of videos for them, and they paid me with some gear. So that's, to be completely above board, I didn't actually pay for these. I like them, and I use them a lot. I was using you're hearing my voice through the Eureka right now. The acoustic guitar from earlier was through the ADL 600. So anyway, there you go. Robert over in YouTube says, hey Joe, are small rooms, like a 10-foot by 12-foot room, worth treating? I got a plan from RLX after I sent them my room layout, and I grabbed some old pieces of Sonex from my church and tacked them up where they suggested. They seem to be doing the job okay, but I have to say, except for maybe some minor low-end reflection control, I can't see spending hundreds on room treatment products. It just seems like very small rooms are hard to judge. What do you think? I think there's really big rooms have the issue of just being big and echoey, right? But they don't have as much of the early reflection problems that you have in small rooms. Small rooms, they don't sound as reverby and echoey, except actually they still can if you don't have any treatment. But you because of the closer quarters you tend to have more frequencies and more issues, and your speakers tend to be closer to corners and stuff like that. It's just by nature of the size of the room that can cause some problems. But I say it's worth treating some. Robert, I wouldn't go any further than what you've done right now. Dealing with some of the reflections, as long as, again, if the room sounds okay to you, then I would just go for it. And you may find, you know what? All my mixes, when I take them to my car, there's this big bump at 250 hertz that I hear every mix that I do. So you just file that away, and when you come back to your studio and you're working on a mix, maybe you cut a lot of stuff at 250 or put an EQ on your mix bus and you just knowing that that's what happens outside of your studio, you cut everything a little bit at 250. What you're doing is you're tuning your mix, or you're essentially tuning your speakers to your room, so you're compensating for what your room is doing, because your room is sucking out all the 250. And so you tend to leave it in or boost it in your mixes to try to hear it, because you can't hear it as well. Problem is, that's actually not an accurate picture of what the mix sounds like. You hear it somewhere else that doesn't have that 250 hertz problem, and you end up with a lot of 250 hertz and everything sounds muddy. That's the problem. Now, does acoustic treatment and room correction fix that? It might help it, but ultimately you learning how to mix on your system is what matters. Scooter Caudle says, I have a sunroom I mix in with glass windows on both sides. Is it even worth it to get monitors? I'll tell you, I've got a big glass door to my right, and then a couple of windows, but then like a door over here that I don't really have any treatment on. And to me, especially because they're a little farther away, I feel like I'm hearing more first reflections than I am the bouncing off of there. But same thing again, I still think my room sounds okay and I can get a decent mix. Absolutely, I think it's a good idea to get monitors if you got the budget and you'd like them. I think you should, because to me, mixing on headphones is fine. I feel like mixing on monitors is a little more natural. Yes, you have the issues of the room, but I feel like I can set balances and I can feel the mix better if I'm on speakers than if I'm on just headphones. That said, can you get great mixes on headphones exclusively? Absolutely. But if you ever work with clients, you have people coming into your studio to either have you mix or to record stuff, you want to have speakers for them to hear what they just did, right? If you have 3 people in your room and you're all sharing one set of headphones to listen back, that's just awkward. So it would make sense to have some speakers there. And while you've got them, might as well learn how to mix on them. Raul says, another question from YouTube, says, I have some DIY baffles that I made of blankets in order to kill some reflections from plane surfaces near the mic. What do you think about it? At least the baffles are practical for mobile recording. Yeah. Raul, that's exactly, like, I think moving blankets have always been kind of the thing people have talked about, a great way to get to deaden the space. If you've got a vocalist in a corner, hang up a couple of blankets and suddenly things are a little tighter. You know, it doesn't sound as big and roomy. Will it sound maybe a little muddy because you're blocking in some frequencies? I don't know, maybe. But ultimately, I think if your biggest problem is the room reflections, then you've taken care of it. And I see Raul is here on the chat. Very cool. But no, I think that's a fantastic idea. To me, that's a little more fun. It's a little bit uglier solution, but ultimately, what are we here for? To make good music, right? You've seen my back room and how ugly that is, but it works, and we're doing recording in there, and it sounds kind of cool. So, yes, I'd like to make it prettier, and maybe you get some baffles down the road that you build yourself or someone else builds or you buy that sound really good, but ultimately, what do they want from you? They want a good sounding record, not one that was pretty to watch being made at all times. Last question on YouTube over on the video I posted earlier today says, this is from Blind Fret. I've been driving insanity for miles of hours trying to decide if I really need to put 4-foot high bass baffles in the corners right and left of my room. My reason is that I always seem to be fighting the bass response in my room, either way too much or mostly not enough. Being a guitar player, I do fight the fight of making sure all can be heard besides the guitar. A quick thought on bass treatment would be great from you. So I kind of covered this already a little bit. Oh, and Blind Fret's here on the chat as well. Very cool. So to me, I kind of already touched on this. You're going to fight bass response in your room. The biggest thing you can do is, if you want to get bass traps, go for it. But to me, even when you get them, your room won't be perfect. It won't be fixed. You'll still need to learn how the bass needs to sound in your room so that it translates into other systems. So that means this is a big point, by the way. When you're learning a room, it's really important to not only listen to your music or your mixes in there. Pull up your favorite albums and spend time listening in that room. It doesn't mean you have to sit here in the mix position, at full attention for 40 minutes while you listen to the whole album. But while you're setting up the room, while you're cleaning up the room, while you're, on your computer doing email, just be listening to that. And sometimes listen very intently, but sometimes just having it on and letting your brain process, okay, this is what a good mix sounds like in my room. This is what a good mix sounds like in my room. This is what a good mix sounds like in my room. And guess what? The next time you hear one of your mixes in that same room and it doesn't sound like that mix, things will jump out immediately. right? Because you've been listening to good mixes and you hear how they sound, how they translate into your room. It'll make the mixes that you do that don't sound like that stand out. So you'll hear things like, oh, the low end is gone in my mix, but it was there in theirs. Or the low end is way too loud in my mixes, but it sounds really good in theirs. And you just kind of learn that this may not be how I think a good mix should sound tone-wise. Maybe I wish my room had a little more bass to it, and that's legit, and maybe something like bass traps would help with that. But ultimately, I don't have much sympathy for you because you can listen to, that's the beautiful thing about this. There's nothing to stop you from pulling down Wallflowers, Bringing Down the Horse, pull up that album and listen. Or you pick your favorite U2 record or whatever, it doesn't matter what the record is, and listening, and you can hear, okay, this is how much bass I need in my mixes. And then you just do that. You do whatever you heard. That's the beauty of this. You can't not steal ideas from all the other engineers in the world because their music is out, they get done and they release it to the public. Now, you don't know exactly what plugin they used or whatever, but you do know what it sounded like. How much bass did they have? How much high end? How much low end? How loud were the vocals? All these things. And you can listen to those in your very system and determine, okay, is this right? Do I have enough low end in my mix compared to theirs? And you just compare. You're not trying to copy. It's not going to ever be a perfect comparison. But if you get to where you know what good mixes sound like in your system, as things turn around and you work more and more on your stuff, you'll hear, oh, okay, so that's what a good mix sounds like, and mine doesn't sound like that. I can hear it's the upper mids that are different on mine from the professional mix. Let me go mess with that some. And you do that, and you repeat, and you do it over and over and over, and you end up with something that's really kind of cool and special. Watchman for You says, Joe, have you found to combat the bass buildup that sounds great in the studio, in the car there's too much bass? It's the same thing. Just because it sounds great in your studio doesn't mean it's a great sounding mix. It has to sound great everywhere else. So you may have a little too much bass response in your room. You can try treating it, or you can just mix better, meaning accommodate for that. So have less bass in your mixes to where you sacrifice, because again, listen to one of your favorite albums in your studio and you'll hear it won't have as much bass as you think it should, quote unquote. Well, guess what? That means their mix is right, yours is not. So make your mix mimic their mix on some level, and you'll be in good shape. That's all the time I have for today. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to follow me over on YouTube and Facebook. Come say hi, and I'll see you next week.